It was late, too late for me to still be at school, but there I was, sitting at a desk in the darkened classroom. I had stayed behind after everyone else left because I had forgotten to finish an important assignment. The hallways had been bustling with students just a few hours ago, but now they were dead silent, the echo of my movements louder than they should have been. I didn't mind being alone. In fact, I liked the quiet, the stillness that hung in the air after the school day ended. But something about that evening felt different. It wasn't the silence that bothered me, it was the weight of it. There was a heaviness in the air that I couldn't explain. The clock on the wall ticked softly, each second a reminder that I should hurry up and get out of there. I finished the last sentence of my paper, gathered my things, and stood up, my chair scraping the floor with a screech that seemed far too loud in the empty classroom. I winced at the noise, feeling a sudden unease settle over me. I made my way toward the door, and as I stepped into the hallway, the fluorescent lights flickered above me. I glanced up, expecting them to stop, but they didn't. They continued to blink, casting strange shadows across the corridor. The school was old, and I knew the lights flickered sometimes. Still, it made my skin crawl. I shrugged it off and headed toward the main exit. My footsteps echoed down the long hallway, the sound bouncing off the walls. It was only then that I realized just how empty the building was. As I passed the gym, I heard a faint noise, almost like a shuffle. I stopped, my heart skipping a beat, and listened. Nothing. It was probably just the building settling, I told myself. The school creaked and groaned all the time. But then I heard it again, clearer this time. A scraping sound, like something heavy being dragged across the floor. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to keep walking, to get out of there as fast as I could, but another part of me, the curious part, wanted to check it out. I glanced around, half expecting to see a janitor or a teacher, but there was no one. I was alone. Taking a deep breath, I turned and walked toward the gym doors. The sound was louder now, more distinct. It definitely wasn't the building settling. I pushed open the door, the heavy metal creaking as it swung inward. The gym was dark, the only light coming from a few dim bulbs high up in the ceiling. At first, I didn't see anything out of the ordinary. The gym was just as I had left it earlier that day, rows of bleachers, the basketball hoop, the faint smell of sweat and sneakers lingering in the air. But then I saw it, out of the corner of my eye. Something moved, just behind the bleachers. Something small, quick. I froze. My eyes darted to the spot where I'd seen the movement, but whatever it was gone now. I stepped forward, my heart pounding in my chest. I wasn't sure why I was doing this. Every instinct told me to turn around and leave, but something pulled me toward the bleachers. As I approached, I saw a figure crouched low, its back to me. It was small, maybe the size of a child, but it moved in a way that was all wrong. Its limbs were too long, its movements jerky and unnatural. It was hunched over something, scraping at the floor. I took a step back, my breath catching in my throat. The thing turned its head slowly, deliberately, until its face, if you could even call it a face, was looking directly at me. It had no eyes, just a hollow, dark sockets that seemed to stare right through me. Its mouth was a twisted, gaping hole, lined with sharp, jagged teeth. I stumbled back, my foot catching on the edge of the bleachers. The thing rose to its full height, standing on two impossibly long legs. It made no sound, but I could hear its heavy breathing, see the way its chest heaved with each breath. It took a step toward me, its clawed fingers twitching at its sides. I turned and bolted. I didn't care where I was going, as long as it was away from that thing. My footsteps echoed wildly through the empty halls as I sprinted toward the nearest exit, my heart hammering in my chest. I could still hear it behind me, the soft shuffle of its feet, the scraping of its claws on the floor. I burst through the doors and into the stairwell, taking the steps two at a time. My legs burned with the effort, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. When I reached the bottom, I flung open the door and stumbled into the main hallway. It was dark here too, the flickering lights casting eerie shadows on the walls, but then I saw something that made my blood run cold. At the far end of the hallway, standing just beneath one of the flickering lights, was another figure. It was taller, its body unnaturally thin and elongated. Its head was cocked at an odd angle, its mouth twisted into a grotesque smile. I skidded to a halt, my heart pounding in my ears. I was trapped. The thing from the gym was behind me, and now this ... This thing was in front of me. I didn't know what to do. I could hear the gym creature getting closer, its clothes scraping against the floor. In a panic, I darted into a nearby classroom and slammed the door shut behind me. My hands shook as I locked it, praying that the door would hold. I backed away slowly, my eyes never leaving the door, waiting for it to burst open. But nothing happened. The room was quiet, eerily quiet. The only sound was my ragged breathing. I turned around, expecting to see desks, chairs, the usual classroom setup, but the room was empty. Completely empty, except for a single desk in the center of the room. My heart skipped a beat. Something about the desk felt wrong, out of place. It was too clean, too pristine for this dusty, abandoned room. I approached it slowly, my footsteps echoing in the silence. On the desk was a piece of paper. It was old, yellowed with age, the edges curling slightly. I picked it up, my hands trembling. The writing on the paper was barely legible, scrawled in dark, jagged letters. Leave now. Before I could process what I was seeing, I heard the soft creak of the door. I turned around slowly, my heart racing. The door was opening, just a crack, but enough to let me see the shadow on the other side. The gym creature. It stood there, hunched over, its dark sockets fixed on me. It didn't move, it just stood there, waiting. Behind it, in the hallway, I could see the other figure. They were both watching me, waiting for me to make a move. I didn't wait. I threw the paper down, grabbed the chair, and hurled it at the window. The glass shattered, and without thinking, I climbed through the broken frame, cutting my hands and arms as I tumbled to the ground outside. I ran. I didn't stop running until I was far from the school, far from the creatures that had been watching me. When I finally slowed down, gasping for breath, I glanced back at the school. The windows were dark, the building silent. I never went back to that school. I didn't tell anyone what had happened. But sometimes, late at night, I can still hear the soft scrape of claws on the floor, the creak of a door opening, the sound of something breathing just outside my window, and I wonder if it's waiting for me to come back. Every school has its secrets, and mine was no different. It was an old building with long hallways, creaking floors, and a history that seemed to linger in the air like a musty smell. It was a place where laughter echoed in classrooms and the buzz of excitement filled the halls, but beneath the surface, an unsettling energy pulsed, especially at night. I had always been curious about the rumors surrounding our school. They whispered about a room that was rarely mentioned and never used. Students said it was haunted. Some claimed to have heard whispers coming from within its walls, but no one ever dared to go near. I was fascinated and terrified, and when I found out that my friends had planned a late-night exploration of the school, I knew I had to join them. That Friday night, we gathered at the school entrance. The stars shone brightly above us, but the night air was thick with anticipation and fear. We slipped through the entrance, the doors creaking as they closed behind us, sealing us in with the shadows. The school was alive in a different way at night. The sounds of our footsteps echoed off the walls, and the occasional gust of wind rattled the windows. We made our way through the darkened hallways, flashlights flickering as we moved. Laughter filled the air, masking the nervousness that pulsed beneath the surface. After wandering through a few classrooms and the gym, we finally arrived at the fabled door. It was at the end of a long corridor, slightly ajar, with an old sign hanging crookedly above it that read storage room. No one seemed to remember this room being part of our school. A heavy silence enveloped us as we exchanged uneasy glances. Should we open it? One of my friends whispered, his voice barely above a breath. Of course, I said, attempting to sound brave. This is what we came for. With that, I pushed the door open. The hinges groaned in protest, and the air that escaped felt cold and stale, sending a shiver down my spine. Inside was a small room, cluttered with broken desks, dusty books, and old supplies long forgotten. It felt oppressive, the shadows pressing in on us from all sides. As we stepped inside, the atmosphere shifted. The laughter faded, and an unsettling silence settled over us. My flashlight beam danced across the walls, revealing peeling paint and faded posters, but something caught my eye. In the far corner of the room stood a large, antique mirror, covered in dust and cobwebs. It seemed out of place, and an unexplainable urge compelled me to approach it. "Hey, check this out," I called to my friends, brushing the dust off the mirror's surface. It reflected the dim light of our flashlights, casting eerie shadows around the room, but something was wrong. As I stared into the mirror, I saw not just my reflection but something behind me. I turned quickly, heart racing, but nothing was there. My friends noticed my sudden movement and turned to see what had startled me. "What's wrong?" one asked, concern evident in her voice. I thought I saw something, I replied, shaking it off. It was just my imagination. We continued exploring the room, but the feeling of unease lingered. My friends decided to look through the old supplies while I stayed by the mirror, feeling inexplicably drawn to it. Suddenly, one of my friends yelled, causing me to jump. "Guys, come here, you won't believe this." I hurried over to see what the commotion was about. They had found an old yearbook, yellowed with age, lying atop a dusty pile of books. The pages were fragile, and as we flipped through, we saw familiar faces, but one picture stood out. It was a group photo taken in the very same room we were in, but the date on the page was decades old. As we scanned the faces, I felt a chill creep up my spine. One of the students in the photo had eyes that seemed to follow me. I quickly turned away, trying to shake off the feeling of being watched. My friends continued to examine the yearbook, completely oblivious to my discomfort. "Hey, look at this," one of them said, pointing to the name below the photo. It read M. Thompson, class of '72. "Who was that?" I asked, trying to feign interest while my heart raced. "Not sure. There's no information about her," another friend said, flipping through the pages, searching for more. Just then, I felt a cold breeze rush through the room, extinguishing our flashlights. Darkness enveloped us, and I could hear my friends gasping in surprise. Panic surged within me, and I fumbled for my phone, quickly turning on the flashlight app. The weak light flickered to life, illuminating the room in an eerie glow. "Guys, stay close," I said, my voice trembling. We huddled together, casting nervous glances toward the mirror. To my horror, I noticed that the reflection was different. Instead of our frightened faces, the mirror showed the old room as it once was, filled with students laughing and talking, the very same students from the yearbook. I stepped closer, my heart pounding in my chest. "Look," I whispered, pointing at the mirror. The laughter echoed through the room, growing louder as if the memories were coming to life. I could feel a presence in the air, an overwhelming sense of longing that washed over me like a wave. The students in the mirror began to fade, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw M. Thompson among them. Her eyes locked onto mine. Then came the scream again, a piercing, anguished sound that shattered the memory. My friends and I jumped, our breath caught in our throats. "What was that?" one of them gasped, fear evident in her voice. "I don't know," I replied, my hands shaking. "We need to get out of here." We turned to leave, but the door slammed shut, trapping us inside. Panic surged within me, and I yanked at the doorknob, but it wouldn't budge. My friends screamed, and I felt the weight of something pressing in around us. "Help! Let us out!" we shouted, pounding on the door in desperation. As we struggled, the mirror began to shimmer and ripple, the surface undulating like water. A figure emerged from the depths, its face obscured by shadows. My heart raced as it took form. M. Thompson, the girl from the yearbook, stepping out of the mirror, her face twisted in sorrow. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, her voice echoing in my mind. "Leave this place." In that moment, I understood. The room was a trap, a vessel for the memories of those who had once been there. They were trapped, unable to escape, and now they wanted us to join them. But just as fear threatened to engulf us, a sudden crash echoed through the room. The door burst open, and a blast of cold air rushed in. We stumbled backward, falling into the safety of the hallway beyond. The presence receded, the mirror reflecting only our terrified faces. We didn't stop to catch our breath. We sprinted down the hall, the laughter of the past echoing behind us, fading into silence as we reached the entrance. We burst through the doors and didn't look back, heartbeats racing in sync. It wasn't until we were outside that we dared to slow down. Breathing heavily, we gathered ourselves and shared wide-eyed glances. "Did that really happen?" one friend asked, disbelief clouding her voice. I nodded, still shaken by what we had witnessed. "Who was she?" Amy whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't know," I replied, my heart still racing. "But I have a feeling we'll never forget her." We swore we wouldn't tell anyone about that night, but the memories lingered like shadows in our minds. Years later, long after we had graduated and moved on with our lives, the story of the haunted room still floated around campus. New students spoke of the old school with awe and fear, sharing tales of the mysterious girl trapped in the mirror, but the twist came much later. I was visiting the school during a reunion when I noticed a new plaque on the wall near the entrance. Curiosity got the better of me, and I approached it. It was dedicated to M. Thompson, a student who had mysteriously disappeared in the '70s. My heart sank as I read the inscription, the memories flooding back, in memory of M. Thompson, who vanished within the walls of this school. May her spirit find peace. I felt the chill return, knowing that the whispers and shadows still lingered in that place. We had escaped, but she had not. And somewhere in that haunted school, she was still waiting, still searching for those who dared to uncover her story, still longing to share the laughter of the past. I never thought I would end up in a situation like this. It started innocently enough, a typical Tuesday at school. The kind of day where you barely pay attention to the clock because time seems to drag on. I was in my senior year, just a few months away from graduation, and everything felt mundane. That was until the principal announced an after-school project for us, a ghost hunt. The school had a reputation for being haunted. There were stories floating around about the old gymnasium, which had been closed for renovations years ago. People said they could hear laughter and whispers coming from it, especially during the night. I'd heard the rumors, of course, but they seemed exaggerated. That is, until I decided to join a group of friends, my closest pals, Sarah, Mark, and Lisa, to check it out. It was a chilly evening when we gathered in front of the school. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. We felt a mix of excitement and nervous energy as we made our way to the back of the building. The gym loomed in the distance, its broken windows resembling dark eyes watching us. The air was heavy, the kind of silence that made you feel like something was about to happen. We managed to pry open the rusty door at the back of the gym. The hinges squealed in protest, echoing through the empty space as we stepped inside. The darkness enveloped us, and we fumbled for our flashlights. They flickered to life, revealing dust motes dancing in the air and long-abandoned basketball hoops hanging like ghostly sentinels. We decided to split up to cover more ground, a classic horror movie mistake. Mark and Lisa headed toward the locker rooms while Sarah and I ventured deeper into the gym, passing by old bleachers coated in grime. Each creak of the floorboards beneath our feet sent chills down my spine, but I brushed it off, trying to maintain a brave front for Sarah's sake. As we explored, I could feel the temperature drop. My breath became visible in the beam of my flashlight. I shrugged it off as the old building's insulation or lack thereof, but it felt unsettling. Then, we heard something, a low sound, like muffled laughter, drifting down from the rafters. I looked at Sarah, and we both froze, our eyes wide. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, and she nodded, clearly unnerved. We slowly turned our flashlights toward the source of the sound. Nothing but shadows loomed in the high corners, and I began to question whether we should have come in here at all. Just as we were about to leave, we heard footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from the locker room area. We exchanged panicked glances, and Sarah grabbed my arm. "Should we check it out?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I hesitated, but then decided we couldn't let our friends down. Maybe they needed us. As we approached the locker rooms, the laughter grew louder. It echoed off the cold, hard walls, sending shivers racing down my spine. I felt a sense of dread wash over me, but curiosity pushed us forward. When we reached the entrance, we paused, peering inside. The room was empty, but the laughter continued. It felt like it was all around us, swirling through the air. Then we noticed something on the ground, a faint outline of a handprint in the dust. It looked fresh, as if someone had just touched the ground. My heart raced, and I pulled Sarah back. "We shouldn't be here. This isn't right." I started to back away, but just as we turned to leave, the laughter stopped abruptly. The silence was deafening. I could feel my heart pounding in my ears. Suddenly, we heard a loud bang coming from behind us. It sounded like a locker slamming shut. We bolted back toward the main gym area, adrenaline surging through us. As we reached the main floor, Mark and Lisa came running out of the locker rooms, wide-eyed and panting. "What happened?" I asked, my voice shaking. "We saw a figure," Mark said, breathless. "It was in the corner, just standing there." I felt a rush of fear wash over me. "A figure? What do you mean?" I pressed out. "We heard the laughter too," Lisa added, her voice shaky. "It was right behind us." I didn't want to be there anymore. The four of us huddled together, trying to calm each other down. "We should leave," I said, glancing back toward the dark corners of the gym. But just as we turned to head for the door, the lights flickered overhead. In that moment of darkness, I thought I saw a shadow dart past us. I yelled, stumbling back, and the lights came back on, revealing the gym exactly as it had been, empty. But the air felt charged, electric with fear. We were done exploring. I grabbed the door handle, ready to escape, but when I turned it, it wouldn't budge. I pushed harder, panic rising as I pulled and twisted the handle, but it was locked, The laughter returned, echoing around us, louder this time, filling the gym with an almost mocking quality. My heart raced, and I could feel my palms growing slick with sweat. Mark started banging on the door, calling for help, but I knew we were alone. There was no one in the building, the four of us huddled together, and I could feel Sarah trembling beside me. We were all terrified. Then I saw something move in the corner of my eye, a flash of movement. I turned, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw a woman in a white dress standing by the bleachers, her hair hanging over her face. She looked right at me, and then she vanished. I screamed, the sound echoing off the walls, but it didn't matter. The laughter was drowning us out. It felt like the walls were closing in, like the very air was thickening around us. Just as I was about to lose it completely, the lights flickered again, and the door suddenly swung open. We bolted through the doorway, not stopping until we were outside, panting in the cool night air. We stood there for a moment, hearts racing, trying to comprehend what had just happened. We all glanced back at the gym, and I saw it then, something I hadn't noticed before. The school mascot, a fierce-looking wildcat, was painted on the wall above the entrance. Its eyes seemed to glimmer in the dim light, but the pupils were slashed, almost like someone had taken a knife to it. That's when I realized something else. The laughter we had heard was familiar. It sounded like children laughing, but it had been distorted, like an echo. And when we had seen the woman, there was something unnervingly familiar about her. In the weeks that followed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been awakened in that gym, something that had been dormant for years. We never spoke of that night again, but the laughter haunted me. It was a laughter I heard in my dreams, twisting and turning in my mind, like something that should be innocent but was deeply wrong. And then one day, I stumbled upon an old yearbook while cleaning out some things at home. Flipping through the pages, I paused at a photo of the school's basketball team from decades ago. There she was, the girl in the white dress, smiling broadly, surrounded by her teammates. Her name was written beneath the photo. The last entry read, "Tragedy struck during the championship game. Rest in peace." I felt a chill run down my spine. The laughter still echoed in my mind, and I realized it was never just a haunting story. It was a warning. The school was built on the memories of those who came before, and some of those memories refused to stay buried. I could almost hear her whispering now, the ghostly echo of forgotten laughter, "Come back, come play." But there was no way in hell I ever would again. It was just another ordinary afternoon at school. The kind where the sun hangs lazily in the sky and the halls are filled with the echo of laughter and chatter. My friends and I had just finished our last class for the day, and as we walked down the hallway, we discussed our plans for the weekend. But everything changed when a rumor started circulating. A group of students claimed they had discovered a hidden area in the old part of the school. It was said to be a place where no one had been in years, a forgotten wing that was off limits due to safety concerns. I felt a thrill at the thought of exploring somewhere forbidden, so naturally, I agreed to join them. As we made our way to the old wing, the atmosphere shifted. The chatter died down, replaced by a tense silence that hung heavily in the air. The paint on the walls was peeling, and the floors creaked ominously under our footsteps. It felt as if the building itself was alive, watching us as we stepped further into the forgotten space. After walking through dimly lit hallways, we finally found the entrance to a large room. The door was slightly ajar, as if inviting us to step inside. With a shared glance of excitement and fear, we pushed it open. The room was massive, filled with dust and shadows. Old desks and chairs lay scattered, remnants of a classroom that had long been abandoned. Sunlight barely filtered through the grimy windows, casting eerie shapes on the walls. As we explored the room, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. I glanced around nervously, my heart racing, but everyone else seemed too engrossed in their own discoveries. Suddenly, one of my friends let out a startled gasp. We all turned to see what had caused the commotion. In the far corner of the room, there was a large mirror. It was covered in dust, the glass cracked and foggy. My friend dared me to go check it out. I hesitated, feeling a strange pull towards it, but I couldn't let my friend see my fear. I approached the mirror cautiously. As I leaned in closer, I saw a distorted reflection of myself staring back. But behind my reflection, something moved. I whipped around, heart pounding, but the room was empty. I turned back to the mirror, and that's when I saw it again. A shadow, darker than the rest of the room, creeping slowly in the reflection. I froze, panic clawing at my throat. I took a step back, bumping into my friend, who was now beside me. She looked concerned, and before I could explain, we all heard it. A faint whisper, barely audible, but it sent chills down my spine. It sounded like someone calling my name, but I couldn't tell where it was coming from. The other students began to get restless. One of them suggested we leave, but curiosity got the better of me. I stepped closer to the mirror again. The whisper grew louder, more insistent, and I could almost make out the words. It sounded like a plea, a desperate call for help. Then I saw it. In the reflection, a figure emerged behind me, its features shrouded in darkness. I whipped around, expecting to see someone standing there, but no one was behind me. My heart raced as I turned back to the mirror. The figure was now inches from my face, its eyes wide and pleading. I stumbled backward, horrified. My friends were now panicking, unsure of what to do. We needed to leave. Just as we turned to run, the door slammed shut on its own. I was filled with terror as the whispers grew louder, echoing in my mind. My pulse raced as I banged on the door, yelling for help, but no one came. We were trapped. The temperature in the room dropped suddenly. I could see my breath in front of me, and the shadows around us seemed to pulse and thicken. In a moment of sheer desperation, I turned back to the mirror. I had to confront whatever was happening. In the reflection, the figure was no longer just a shadow. I could see its face now, hollow eyes, a mouth twisted in silent anguish. It raised a finger, pointing towards something behind me. I turned, and there it was, a dark shape hovering in the corner of the room. It was featureless, a mass of darkness that seemed to absorb all light. I screamed, urging my friends to find a way out, but the whispers drowned my voice. They swirled around us like a tempest, each one laced with terror. Then, just as quickly as it had started, everything went quiet. The door creaked open, and we stumbled out, gasping for air as we fled down the hallway. We ran until we reached the safety of the crowded main building, our hearts pounding. We looked at each other, shaking, unsure if we had really just experienced what we thought we had. Days passed without incident. We tried to forget about the old wing, but the whispers lingered in the back of my mind. I often found myself staring at the mirror in my bathroom, half expecting to see the figure lurking behind me, but I never saw anything. Then came the day of the school assembly. As we gathered in the auditorium, the principal announced that the school would be undergoing renovations, including the old wing. They planned to tear down the walls and turn it into a new gym. A collective sigh of relief passed through the students. It was over. We were safe. But as the assembly continued, the principal began recounting the history of the school. It was all mundane until he mentioned a tragic incident that had occurred years ago. A student had gone missing, never to be found. They had searched everywhere, but the case went cold, the mystery unsolved. The last known location of the student was the very same old wing we had explored. I felt a chill run down my spine. My friends and I exchanged glances, our hearts racing. The principal continued speaking, unaware of the dread building in the audience. Just as he was about to move on to the next topic, the lights flickered overhead. The room went dark for a heartbeat before the emergency lights flickered on. In that brief moment of darkness, I saw it again, the figure from the mirror, standing in the back of the auditorium, watching us. My breath caught in my throat, but when the lights came back on, it was gone. I looked around the room, horrified to see that no one else seemed to have noticed. The assembly ended, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me back from that room. Weeks later, I was sitting in class when I received a text from one of my friends. They had gone back to the old wing while no one was around, drawn by an irresistible curiosity. I told them not to go, warned them about what we had experienced, but they insisted it was just a bunch of rumors. They wanted to prove me wrong. The next day, I received a frantic call from them. They were trapped inside the old wing, and they could hear whispers. Panic surged through me as I ran to the school, but when I arrived, the doors to the old wing were locked tight, and no one seemed to care that my friend was in there. I had to find a way in. I snuck around to a side entrance, one I remembered from our first visit. The door was slightly ajar, and I slipped inside. The air was thick and cold, and the whispers began the moment I stepped over the threshold. I called my friend's name, but the only response was silence. I moved deeper into the darkness, heart pounding. The old classroom felt different now, as if it had come alive with malevolence. I could almost feel the walls closing in on me. Then I heard the whispering again, but this time it was more frantic, more desperate. I ran toward the sound, my footsteps echoing in the empty halls. I reached the classroom where we had found the mirror, and when I opened the door, I was met with a chilling sight. The mirror was gone. In its place was a dark void, an empty space that seemed to pull at the very fabric of reality. I stumbled backward, horrified, when I saw my friends standing at the edge of the void, their eyes wide with terror. I reached out to them, calling their name, but they were entranced, their body moving toward the abyss. I lunged forward, grabbing their arm just as they teetered on the edge. The whispers grew louder, drowning out everything else. I could feel the void tugging at my friend, trying to pull them in. With a desperate heave, I pulled them back, and in that moment, the darkness erupted. The whispers turned into screams, echoing through the halls. The walls shook violently, and I felt a rush of cold air push us back. Just as suddenly as it began, everything stopped. The silence was deafening. My friend blinked, confusion washing over their face as they pulled away from the edge of the void. We ran, escaping the old wing for the last time. I never went back, and neither did they. The school eventually closed that wing for good, and it was as if the entire building sighed in relief. The rumors faded, and the school was renovated, but I can't shake the feeling that the void is still there, lurking just beneath the surface, waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to wander too close. And sometimes, late at night, when I close my eyes, I hear the whispers again, calling me back.